Good afternoon and welcome to yet another EMD Education on Air. And we will give about 2 minutes for all our viewers to join in. So please bear with us. This is just to give you time to join in for the Education on Air. We have started our broadcast for an Education on Air with EMD, and we will give it about 2 minutes for all our viewers to join in. So please bear with us. A very good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. And today's Education on Air features a very highly respected attorney, Mr. Stuart J. Oberman. He is the founder and president of Oberman Law Firm, a mid-sized law firm located in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Mr. Oberman has been practicing law for over 21 years, and before going into private practice, he was in-house counselor for a Fortune 500 company. Mr. Oberman represents dental clients through the United States in a wide range of areas, including mergers and acquisitions, private equity transactions, partnership agreements, commercial real estate, entity formation, employment law, commercial litigation, commercial leasing, construction law, corporate law, e-commerce, estate planning, global business strategies, intellectual property, internal law, joint ventures, licensing, partnerships, and strategic alliances. Mr. Oberman is a frequent lecturer and has published articles in the US and Canada. In addition, he recently received, for the second year in a row, the Martindale-Hubbell Client Distinction Award, which is based on the client review rating in the categories of communication ability, responsiveness, and quality of services. Less than 1% of the 900,000 plus attorneys listed on the martindale.com and lawyers.com have been accorded this honor of distinction. Mr. Oberman has written articles for dental publications such as Inside Dentistry, Dental Town, Efficiency Magazine, Dental Tribute, Dentistry Today, and others. Currently, Mr. Oberman is in the board of directors of the DDD Foundation, which is Dentistry for the Developmentally Disabled. Hello, Mr. Oberman. It is great to have you with us on EMD Education on Air. Please do tell us more about your firm and, of course, on what you would be educating us today.
Well, first, thank you. I'd like to thank you for the kind introduction, and much credit goes to Entrepreneur.MD, which is an extraordinary portal for the medical field for what you guys do. So we are really eternally grateful for the opportunity to be associated and speak at this particular opportunity. I'm very fortunate that about 70% of our firm does dental-related matters for dentists throughout the country, and we try to be on the forefront of all of the issues facing the dental industry. And one of the biggest topics right now in the industry is MSOs. And I can start our presentation whenever you are ready for us to begin.
Yes, Mr. Oberman, you can go ahead and start the presentation.
Great, thank you. And again, thank you for the kind introduction. First off, we got to figure out, what does MSO mean? You're going to hear a lot of things. You're going to hear DMSO. You're going to hear MSO. You're going to hear the acronyms DSO. Basically, the MSO is a management service organizations. And I'm very fortunate that I have the opportunity to speak to fantastic organizations about 10 to 15 times a year. And this is one of the hottest topics that I'm asked to speak about, comment about, write about. So I'm just totally honored to be giving this presentation. We're going to cover a wide range of areas today. We're going to cover MSO, the wave of the future, the trap. This is significant because if our doctors form an MSO and they don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing, it is a trap for the unwary. Team in place. No matter what you do, especially in the MSO field, you've got to have your team in place. You've got to have the advisors who can tell you which way to go and not to go, the bad steps, the good steps. The structure, the corporate structure for dentistry. How do you want to form your particular MSO, your organization? There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And I'll tell you, I see a lot of cases where our clients go to functions and parties and they get what I call the napkin advice, where they know a friend who's done this or they know a colleague who's done this, and this is how they've done it. And many times, if they follow that route, it is an absolute recipe for disaster. Then we're going to get into the management structure itself, the actual management services organization. How is that set up? What do you do? How does it function? How do all these things interplay with the industry and running a dental office? And then we'll have the MSO relationship between the dentist and the MSO. Which is absolutely critical, and there are certain boundaries that a dentist and MSO cannot cross, and we will certainly get into those a little bit later. Wave of the future. Hopefully you're going to receive cutting-edge information. This is stuff that we deal with every day. This is the questions that we get. We try to be up to date on everything we're doing, the laws and what's going on with different states, and what's going on with different funding in venture capital areas and how things are being set up. So hopefully what you'll receive today will be some cutting edge information. This is the perfect scenario where you can call me now or call me later. If the guidelines are not followed in what we're doing here today, you're either going to call your lawyer today or later, because you're going to have problems if it's not structurally correct. Legal information. We're going to cover a wide range of legal information regarding the structure for the MSOs, the different states, the summaries of different states as to how and when an MSO can interact, the relationships, board rules, and we're seeing a clamp down on dental boards on the whole structure. Acquisition information. What and how does this play into when you purchase a practice, or you're selling a practice, or you're going to go ahead and give the management side of your practice to an entity to handle? consulting, HR, the biggest buzzword in today's markets are scaling up, the economies of scale. What and how do you scale up? And then obviously putting all this together where you've got to have the consultants, the HRs, because if you don't have the foundation, then at that point you cannot scale up, as they say, and acquire more practices. The clinic, the final piece. There is a very, very fine line as to how the clinical side of a dental practice has to run. Who has control over it? What authority do they have to give out? What type of management structure is feasible and allowable under the law and the dental boards? Corporate structure. This has to be done right from the start. You cannot acquire 4, 5, 6 practices and not have your foundation correct. If the legal and financial side is not established immediately before you start acquiring different practices and different legal structures, there are enormous legal and financial implications if you do it wrong, and if in the middle of the game you've got to change course and restructure. How is your corporation going to be set up? What does your LLC look like? I know in Georgia, it's very popular to have professional corporations. In some other states, it's awful popular to have LLC set up. So how do those entities intertwine with what you're doing from a corporate structure standpoint? I would never, ever do a partnership in an MSO. And when I say partnership, I mean 2 individuals. That's a recipe for disaster. There are structures that you can have where you have maybe 2 entities that own an MSO, but I would never have it where individuals own or operate an MSO. Joint ventures, absolutely. We're seeing a lot of interplay, strategic alliances. We're seeing a lot of companies coming together, a lot of joint ventures, and that, if it's done in the right structure, is very feasible, very economical, and it's a win-win for everybody. But these have got to be set up from the start correctly. Land. If the MSO decides they're going to buy land, and we'll get into this towards the end of the slideshow and how all the structure comes into play, but you're in a whole different ballgame. The MSO itself runs the dental office, the internal side. If the MSO decides they're going to start purchasing land and housing dental practices, that is a whole different concept that really could be a whole nother slideshow as it stands. Especially if you're going to be acquiring multiple LLCs and multiple MSO organization issues. The trap, the board. The biggest obstacle, the biggest compliance issue is every dental board in every state. And we are seeing a crackdown, in some cases justifiably so, where the dental boards are taking an active role as to what and how MSOs can be formed, what they can do, the management side of what they can do. Matter of fact, some states have even decided that they will have a model management service organization agreement between the dental practice and the management service organization. But before you do an MSO and before the doctor takes the leap, you have to understand what the board rules are. Any attorney that you hire better know the board and the law. We get a lot of inquiries that we have retired dentists that say, hey, I'm not active. Although my license is valid, it's not active. My lawyer said I can do a MSO and acquire dental practices. No, you cannot. There is a big difference between being active and non-active and what the rights and responsibilities are of a dentist if they're active and not active. There are enormous potential problems if you have non-active dental dentists acquiring dental practices and running organizations. In many, many, many states, there's only, I believe, a handful that will allow a non-dentist to own a practice. Other than that, you have to be a dentist to own a practice. South Carolina is one where you do not, and I believe there's a couple other ones. But and I see those changing quickly. An MSO can never, ever, ever make healthcare decisions, and that's where these organizations get into trouble. There has to be spelled out clearly in an MSO agreement, Management Service Organization agreement, with the dental practice as to what the MSO is responsible for and what the dentist is responsible for. There are very fine lines. We're going to cover this a little bit later as to what a dentist can do and what an MSO can do and not do. And for those who don't know and they form these and they get bad advice, it can be catastrophic consequences. One of the issues we run into a lot of times is the MSO will control the equipment and purchase the equipment as an investment for the dental practice. Well, if the dentist thinks he needs a $100,000 piece of equipment, cone beam, and the MSO investor says, no, I'm not spending the money, where does that lie? Because now you've got the MSO directing potentially dental care for the office, and the dentist indicates that in order to do the best that he needs to for his patients, he's got to have that cone beam for $110,000. So those are the issues that come into play, and there has to be defined lines. Federal compliance. As our doctors scale up, 1 practice, 2, 5, 10, they have to know OSHA requirements. They have to have coordinated efforts between their offices, and they are more subject to audits for failure to comply as their practices grow. HIPAA, 2013, the final rule was implemented, and for those who have not implemented it, it's a nightmare. My estimation is probably 85% of all dentists are in non-compliance. Everyone I've talked to at seminars, you mention the word HIPAA, and it's a deer in headlights. They don't know about the new changes, significant changes in 2013. And that becomes a problem when our doctors want to acquire multiple practices and organizations want to come in and manage those. Every HIPAA violation runs from either 100 or 50,000 per violation. If you have multiple practices and there's a multiple breach of information, it's catastrophic. Who's in charge of compliance? The doctor or the MSO? When HHS, Health and Human Services, when their Civil Rights Division comes in and has a question regarding HIPAA and potential violation, they're coming to the doctor, they're not coming to the MSO. The doctor has to be fully accountable in HIPAA instead of the MSO. Who's going to do the educational side? The MSO or the doctor? Usually it's the MSO. So those are things that have to be coordinated. Under HIPAA, if our doctors have multiple practices and they're transferring data between offices, you've got to have encryptions. You've got to have transfer data agreements with patients between offices. Files have to be transferred. How are they going to be transferred? Electronically? Are they going to be transferred physically? Those all require HIPAA issues. Employment law. I know in Georgia, it's very strict as to what dental practices can and cannot do employment-wise. And I know it's the same throughout different states. U.S. Department of Labor, we're seeing a very high uptick in audits in our dental practices. Now, if you have multiple offices, or you have or want to have multiple offices, you have to know the 72-hour rule, because you've got to be organized. If you have a employee, former or present, that complains to the Department of Labor regarding certain things that are going on in the dental practice, you will get a letter from the U.S. Department of Labor that you have 72 hours to produce payroll, employment information, tax returns, 3 to 4 years, job descriptions. These must be organized within the practice. You can't scale up and acquire multiple practices or run multiple practices if you do not have the foundational basis for a organized structural practices. You've got to understand exempt and non-exempt employees. Who are your contractors? Do you need agreements? Is this going to be handled by the practice or the MSO? Are your contractors under contract in writing? Do your doctors have employment contracts? As you scale up and you get practices, multiple practices, these are multiple issues that could really affect financially how these practices are run, operated, and profitability. We have so many offices that absolutely have no employee policies, procedures, and employee manuals, nevertheless overtime pay. There's no way that those kind of offices can scale up and acquire, and doctors acquire multiple practices, because they don't even have that as a foundation. So those are critical issues that have to be in play and implemented if a practice is going to succeed in a multi-practice area, especially with the operational side being run by a management services organization, who in all likelihood will take care of that, but those have to be overseen by the doctor. Internet social media policies. We have enormous problems with what patients and employees of dental practices say. And you've got to get those procedures in order if you're going to have your offices run by a management company. 50 plus employees. Now, if you have multiple practices, you all of a sudden have come under the Family Leave Act. Now you're in federal compliance issues. That is a whole different ballgame from being a single practice owner. This, if it's not done correctly, can really, really cause problems under federal compliance issues. Some of our practices have multiple locations, although they're owned by one doctor, and as a strategy of the 50 employees under the Family Leave Act, every practice has its own entity to fall under that 50 employee limit. So there's various things you can do along with implementation to be in compliance and yet run your office efficiently. Team in place. You know, no matter what you do, whether you're an attorney, doctor, you've got to have your team in place. You have to have people surround you that know what they're doing. You've got to have a consultant. If you don't have a consultant running these practices, overseeing the practices, you have no controls. You have no pluses and minuses. You don't know where the procedures are, where your money's going. Accountability. Lab technicians. I'll use the word scale up. This is one of the things where if you have a good lab and you have multiple practices, which a lot of our clients do, this is where you save money. This is where you trim the budget a little bit. You have quality labs that are willing to work with you on price because of the sheer volume that comes with those transactions on multi-practice areas. Attorney. You've got to have an attorney who understands this business. And it's something you can't do part-time. And it can't be a neighbor who handles DUIs, divorce law, and estate planning. They have to understand how the operational side of a dental practice goes in a multi-practice area. Broker. You got to have a good broker. If you're going to scale up and acquire multiple practices, you have to have a broker who can get you quality practices, who can give you information as to what the market is, what the trends are, what the fees are, what the costs are. Is it going to be a sale of 80% of value averaged over 3 years gross? So those are things you have to know if you're going to acquire or have multiple practices. You know, many of our viewers here today may be on that team. We don't know. So be careful who you associate yourself with and have your team in place and utilize your team. You can't do it alone. If you don't have the right people in place, you are dead in the water from the start. At some point, if you don't have the right people in place, your foundation will not be there, and I'll use the word, the kingdom will crumble needlessly. Corporate structure. You have really two basic structures. You have your professional corporations, and you have your limited liability companies. They'll vary from state to state, from region to region, but just about all states have professional corporations and limited liability companies. And that's your corporate structure for your dentists. In many states, only a dentist can own a practice, and they'll have it incorporated under a PC or an LLC. You have to be careful of the board rules. I'll use Georgia as an example. You've got to have an active license in Georgia. If you go to another state and you don't have an active license, you cannot own a dental practice, irregardless of whether you have a PC or an LLC. In many, many states, a non-licensed dentist can never own a dental practices. Matter of fact, in some states, it's a felony. Not even 1%, which means that you can't give one share to your wife, your friend, your relative, your associates, if they're not licensed dentists. You can't give it to an investor. An investor cannot, in many states, invest in your dental practice and become an owner. If you take out a loan for expansion and you want to give the investor collateral, you cannot allow him to become an owner. That will cause many doctors to lose their license. Under the MSO model, and I don't know that a state varies from this, the MSO, under that model, the dentist must and has to make all clinical and healthcare decisions. That is critical because that's where a lot of MSOs run into problems, because they don't delineate the structure between the MSO and the dentist. And that's why we see states clamping down on MSOs, because they're not clearly defined and they do not have boundaries in line for this. The dentist has to supervise the dental assistants. The dentist has to supervise hygienists. If they are working in and on patients, that is the responsibility of the dentist, not the MSO. Now, disciplinary matters are a different matter, but clinically, assistants, hygienists, and other dentists who may be in the office have to be under the care of the dentist and structure and management, not the MSO. That is so critical. The charts are responsibility of the dentist. The MSO cannot be in charge of the charts. Now they can look at different things, the AR, make sure the insurance is there, but ultimately the charts and the patient charts and the records are the dentist's responsibility, even though the MSO may be working on those charts. Many, many, many times, and it has to be this way, the MSO is a totally separate company. They're either incorporated or an LLC. I would never recommend an MSO be in the name of an individual. They cannot, in many states, they cannot be a professional corporation. And I would never recommend a general partnership for an MSO. I want to see an incorporation or a limited liability company. I'll tell you, MSOs, hedge funds love them. There is more money being brought into this market. We just received word that one of our clients has about 25 million in funding to acquire dental practices, and he's a dentist. So, and you know what? Why not? Because private individuals and other dentists, they can invest in MSOs. Banks are loaning money on MSOs. You know what? And why not? When you got a good practice that's got a profit margin of 35 to 40%, that's a pretty good return on your money. I always say the ideal practice for an MSO and for doctors to acquire practices in this market is 1.0 to 1.5 million. That is a good practice number. Under the MSO legal structure, the MSO handles the day-to-day operations of the practice. Not the clinical side, but the day-to-day operations. And I'm going to show you a chart a little bit later in the slideshow as to how that's broken down. The MSO can provide capital. The MSO can provide advertising, marketing. The MSO will take care of supplies, staffing, training of non-dental personnel. These are the things that the management company will take care of. I have so many doctors that say, you know what, Stuart, I'm ready to sell. I don't want to handle the day-to-day problems. I don't want to have to worry about staff problems. I don't want to have to worry about OSHA, HIPAA. I don't want to have to worry about firing employees. I just want to get in there. I want to get my hands in the mouth. I want to do it clinically, but I don't want the headaches of day-to-day. And that's why there's more dentists selling now than ever before. The MSO also handle the bills, collections, buy the equipment. They will act as a lease of employees and act as your human resources. So if you take your front desk down to your marketing assistant, to your case planner, all those will come within an MSO structure. And again, we'll go through those on an outline a little bit later in the slideshow. The relationship must be in writing. I would never ever recommend a handshake deal with an MSO that's taking a 5% management fee from a dental practice. It's got to be in writing. You've got to outline the terms. If you don't have this, it's a recipe for absolute disaster. The last thing you need is to have 6, 8, 10 practices, or even 2, and all of a sudden you come into a legal argument with a management service company. You're going to tie yourself up in litigation for a while. Whatever you do, please do not go on the internet and find these documents and try to draft up a contract. Hire somebody who knows what they're doing. Hire a good team of attorneys who know this. I have nothing against LegalZoom, but please don't go to LegalZoom and try to find an MSO agreement. And don't piece it together either. There is nothing wrong with an investor and a dentist owning an MSO together. That is totally separate from the practice. In many of our deals, the investors are 50-50 with the dentist, and that is perfectly okay. There's different structures. There's 49%, 51%. But I strongly recommend that if you have 2 partners in an MSO, you need a shareholders agreement, a buy-sell agreement between those 2. In many cases, the dentist who runs the practice and is also an investor with an MSO will collect a management fee. And a lot of times those management fees are 5%. So there's a wide variety of things that a dentist can actually do with a management company and own the management company and yet still be flexible on their compensation. we're going to cover this in a little more detail on the slide, but what happens is that from a structural standpoint, the dentist PC pays the MSO the adjusted revenue less the dentist salary, the hygienist, and the assistants. The rest of it is paid at agreed upon amounts to the MSO to cover the expenses that we'll have broken down in a little bit. You know, I always say there's corporate versus corporate. You know, you've got the bigger companies, you got the Heartlands, you got Coast, you got Cool Smiles. All those are corporate guys. But you know, then you have, I'll use the word corporate, or small corporate, where you have the existing dental practice owners. Maybe they own one, maybe they own five, but yet they're still corporate. The big thing is that they are still active in the practices, and sometimes the bigger corporations, you know, maybe not as active as maybe they should be, but you know, so all this is considered corporate. Whether you're Heartland, Coast, Cool Smiles, it's corporate. Whether you own one practice or five practices, all those are considered corporate. So there's a big difference between the big corporate and the small corporate. This is the wave. This is the wave it's going. This is the way dentistry is going. Dentistry, depending on who you talk to, is 10 to 15 years behind the medical field as far as structure goes. Cutting edge information. This is an amazing statistic. 25% to 30% of all practices are now multi-practice owners. That is up significantly, 5% within 3 years. That is a big jump. And we're going to see this number increasing within the next 5 to 7 years. This is going to be the big push. The MSO model works. It works whether you're small, it works whether you're large. If you have your organization in play and structurally sound, it works. It works if you have advisors who understand the MSO model. The model works if you understand the profitability, yet you can have control of your practice without essentially the headaches of the management. You're never going to get, when you're a dentist, you're never going to get away from the headaches within the practice, but you'll still have control and yet delegate a significant amount of responsibilities that you handle normally day-to-day operational. All right, so let's take a look at this. You got to sell a dental practice, okay? Now I'm going to use the word MSO, and you have a dentist who owns a PC or LLC. The dentist purchases the patient charts and the goodwill. Now you're in a whole different tax area here, but we're not going to get into that today. The doctor purchases the patients and the goodwill. On an average basis, it's about 100% of 3 years average gross collections. Now that's going to vary a little bit, but as a general rule, that's where you're going. The doctor owns the PC. We go up here, the MSO will purchase the assets and enter into an existing lease. The MSO will purchase the supplies, inventory of all of the practices, of the practice they purchase. The MSO is going to purchase the hard assets. The MSO can have a doctor investor percentage. So essentially what could happen, what happens a lot of times is you've got one check the doctor writes to the seller doctor. You have one check at closing that the MSO writes to the doctor for the hard assets. The doctor executes a management agreement with the MSO. So these two are close, but they've got to have an agreement. The doctor signs an employment agreement with the MSO. Doctor a lot of times will have a management fee and also collections, 30% of collections. And the same thing would apply to a second doctor. So there's your structure. The doctor purchases the patients and goodwill, 80%. Now we're seeing some states it's 100%. but I don't think we're there yet as a whole. Doctor owns a PC that purchases it, enters into an agreement with the MSO. They handle the doctor expenses. Management organization owns the hard assets, and they lease the space to the dentist potentially. That's just one structure. MSO structure, the doctor takes care of the patients. The doctor works close with the MSO. The MSO handles the operational side. They'll take care of the staff, salary, hiring, firing, and the management. There's a very clear line regarding the MSO structure: clinical, operational. On a larger scale, you've got the doctor, handles the patients. The doctor will work with the staff and job responsibilities. This may be the clinical side, the hygienist, the assistants. Then you've got the operational side, which here is the MSO. Takes care of the bills, collections, patient, scheduling, marketing, HR, managed care contracts, PPO contracts, supplies, banking, investing, maintain the records, not control it, but maintain it, taxes, hiring, firing, and insurance. Well, that's a quick 45-minute synopsis of a very complex area. This is all that I have on our slides today. And it doesn't matter whether you're buying one practice or you have 20 practices. This is your MSO structure. And again, I would like to thank Delaney, who is our moderator, and Entrepreneur.MD for allowing me to do this. And if there are any questions, I'll be glad to entertain some questions. Looks like we may not have any questions. It looks like we may not have any questions, so I didn't know if we wanted to conclude the webinar at this point.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Oberman. I'm very sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Oberman. I had muted my mic, and I'm very sorry viewers about that.
That's okay.
Yes, I'm very sorry about that. And we do have a few questions, Mr. Oberman. So that was educational indeed, Mr. Oberman. If you can answer these questions for us as well.
I'd be glad to. I'd be delighted to.
Okay. So the first question is we have received is. Why not partnership in a MSO? If you can explain further.
Well,
partnerships. I'm sorry. Why not partnerships in MSO?
Well, partnerships are okay, but I would not recommend individuals going in as a partnership. A partnership is not necessarily the best legal structure because you have, if you have two individuals who want to own an LLC, that's great. If you have individuals that want to own a corporation that run an MSO, that's great. But to go into a partnership just as a general two individuals who, let's say you have John Smith and Tom Hanks doing business as Hanks MSO Management Services, that is a recipe for disaster. I would prefer to have a legal structure own that MSO and not necessarily two individuals who don't form an entity such as a corporation or LLC. And that's the big difference.
Okay, so let's move on to the second question. Yeah, there is another question which says, can there be a partnership who are not practicing, for example, my spouse?
If your spouse is I'll give you two examples, one for the MSO, one for the practice. in a dental practice, depending on your state, many states do not allow a non-licensed dentist to be an owner of a dental practice. If your spouse is a licensed dentist in the state that you are in, and you are a licensed dentist, your spouse can absolutely be a partner, 50-50 owner, or whatever the percentage is in the dental practice itself. In the MSO, the Management Services Organization, you do not need to be a licensed dentist to own or operate a management services organization.
Okay, and we have one more question. Is MSO responsible for tax and employment compliances to have it all updated?
Yes, that is one of the things that they do. They take the place of, I'll use the word place of, a CPA. They handle all the taxes for the employees, and they act as the management company and the tax advisors internally for the dentist and the operational side. So yes, they would take care of the tax operational side of the practice. Now, the dentist may have their own CPAs, the MSO may have their own CPAs running that, but with the dental practices where you have quarterly returns, monthly returns, payroll deposits on a monthly, sometimes weekly basis, the MSO does handle those matters.
Okay, great. So we did have 3 questions, and thank you very much for the viewers who did ask those questions from Mr. Oberman. Is there anything else that you would like to say, Mr. Oberman, as a closing, a few words as a closing remark?
No, once again, thank you, and thank you to Entrepreneur.MD for really doing this. It's really extraordinary what you guys do, and I appreciate it. And the MSO, if it's done right, it can work very well, but it has to be structurally sound. And if our viewers have any questions, they can certainly contact me by email or phone. My email is Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, at obermanlaw.com. It's O-B-E-R-M-A-N law.com. Phone number 770-554-1400. Our website, we have information on there, is www.obermanlaw.com. So we would entertain any questions once we conclude this particular webinar. So thank you very much again.
Yes, and Mr. Oberman, just a last question from me. Will you be continuing with this EOS? Is there something else that you would like to do after MSO, which our viewers can be looking forward to?
As long as you will let me, I will be glad to. One of the biggest areas we are seeing enormous amount of employee embezzlement. That would be where we estimate about 60% of all practices are facing embezzlement. That would be a fantastic topic, and probably HIPAA would be a great topic. So yeah, there's a few that we would look forward to doing, absolutely, and keep the viewers up to date on the latest trends and what's going on in the field. So yes, we'd be delighted to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Oberman, and thank you very much for being with us on this education on air. And thank you very much for all our viewers. Thank you for participating. And of course, from us, it's a very good day to you, and goodbye.
Thank you.